I'm really pleased today to introduce Laetitia DeBlanc. She's been visiting here since the fall. She's basically here for a year. We're happy and delighted to have her. She's been working on several of our freight projects while she's been here. We met at TRB, right? Some years back. And at WCTR and all those places. Laetitia is one of the few people, actually, that I know who have spent a substantial part of their research time looking at issues of urban freight. It's not the topic that is particularly recognized or broadly researched, either in the US or the rest of the world. It's just emerging as a big issue, primarily, I think, because of, first of all, congestion, and secondly, what we're learning about the impacts of diesel particulates on people. And so as the health impacts have become much better understood, we're learning that trucks, of course, are a really big environmental problem in metropolitan areas. Laetitia has done a lot of work on what she calls logistics sprawl. And when I first heard about this, I had no idea what she was talking about. But basically, that has to do with the decentralization of logistics activities to the periphery of metropolitan areas, that it then promotes an even larger separation between the consumers of physical products and where they are, where their distribution points are. And so that process, the decentralization process, generates more truck EMT. In the same way that decentralization may promote or cause more VMT population. So that's an area of work in which I think you're probably it in terms of the person who knows the most. So we're going to hear a little bit about her research today on CO2 emissions and freight in Paris. So with that, Laetitia.
Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you again for welcoming me at Metrons this year. I enjoy being here and learning about Los Angeles. But today I'm going to present some research related to urban freight for the metro area of Paris, for the city of Paris and also the metro area and the region. I will show you a map of what I'm talking about. So I entitled the presentation Comparing 3 CO2 emission assessments. And I will explain why I chose this particular angle. CO2 assessments is not my expertise. I'm a policy analyst, but I find looking at this indicator, I find it very interesting. First, freight transportation is a huge part, actually, of CO2 emissions. And I was surprised when I saw this figure. This is the official national figure for France about the responsibility of freight transportation in the total of CO2 emissions in France. So they mentioned 10%, which would be about 40 million tons of CO2 every year. So 10% is becoming significant. It's not just a little marginal part of the whole issue. I like looking at CO2 too because it's becoming now a favorite indicator in Europe for policymakers and big corporations to mention their environmental achievements. So that's something now that people use. They use it in sometimes not very specific ways, and the methodologies are not always very known to the policymakers or to the mayors that use that indicator. But the point is that it's used. It's an indicator that the mayor of Paris will tell about. The city of Paris is actually emitting such and such CO2, million tons of CO2. That's something that people talk about and mention in their reports. So as a policy analyst, I think it's interesting to take these indicators back and try to look at them in another way. It's an indicator that helps compare different phenomena, different operations, different systems, and that's what I'm going to do today. And I'm going to compare 3 different stories of urban freight, so 3 very different ways of looking at urban freight, but all gone back to CO2 emissions result, in a way. So it's also a way of presenting 3 quite different pieces of urban freight research. Of these 3 research works, I'm responsible for one of them. The other ones, I use them as in order to compare and to draw conclusions about policies. Maybe as an introduction, I will give you a few data, not too much, but a few data and a few words about what's urban freight for a city, European city, a big European city such as Paris. Because now we are lucky enough to have data. We didn't have this data just a few years ago. So this is rather recent, and I want to share with you some of these results, the most interesting ones for our topic of today. So you know that. I mean, every person living in a city think they know that. It's kind of intuitive. But now we have data, and we have a way to prove it, that the number of urban deliveries is increasing. So this graph is presenting 2 different figures, but that shows you the huge change in the way urban distribution is made today. So on the right, you have the tons shipped per urban resident in France. So we took the data, these are surveys that my center does, shipper survey. So we looked in detail at where the goods go from point A to point Z, to the destination. And everything that's happening in city, we look at them and we compile the data. In terms of tons, in terms of the mass of goods we receive, cities receive exactly the same number in 2004 and 15 years before. So we basically receive the same amount of goods in terms of tonnage. But we receive twice as much shipments, a shipment is a delivery in a way, as before. So for the same amount of goods, we need twice as much deliveries, meaning truck movements, as before. It's an enormous change. Shipments are smaller, and the deliveries are more frequent. That's the main message. So a big change in the urban economy, demanding a lot on the transportation system. The freight system meets urban needs. It seems simple to say that, but we all receive the goods we need, and we need more and more, much more diversified goods as we did before. We're very demanding. The businesses, the consumers, every activity in the city is much more demanding than before in terms of the variety of goods and the just-in-time deliveries. The shops have changed their ways of operating. They don't have inventories at all anymore. Offices in cities demand urgent express deliveries more than before. Households demand deliveries at home, and especially in major urban areas in Europe, electronic commerce has increased tremendously for the past 7 years. So now it's about 5% of retail. But it started at 0 in only a few years ago. This means very different deliveries for the trucking industry. They have to go to residential areas. They have to climb stories. They have to know codes to get into the buildings. Very different times of deliveries. Very different ways of relating to the receiver. The households are a very difficult population to deal with for a truck person, a delivery person, because we miss appointments, or we're not at home, or we expect very specific delivery times. These new needs have been met. So these people, these delivery people, manage to still get into the cities twice as much as before and deliver the goods at the time and at the goods we, as consumers and businesses, we want. This means for an area like the Paris region, this means 1 million deliveries per day for the whole region. And for the city of Paris itself, this means 300,000 deliveries or pickups per day. Enormous movements, enormous amount of movements. Just as a brief indication, we got these figures not by doing extensive surveys on Paris, but by using ratios that have been done, that have been found in other French major big cities. And this is something you may want to remember. It's easy to remember. It's 1 delivery per job per week in big urban areas in France. It's just a ratio. And it was convenient to find it because it's 1. But you know the number of jobs in your area. You have just a broad idea of the number of deliveries every week or every day if you divide by 5. So it's a very easy indicator to give to policymakers, to politicians, so that now they have an idea. And we didn't have this simple figure just a few years ago. This is done by the Lyon Transport Economics Laboratory. But what's interesting too is that there are as many urban logistic chains as there are different economic sectors in an area. In an urban area, you can divide the economy by, it's very difficult actually to have big blocks of sectors. You need to go all the way to 200 sectors, for example. Banks would be one, or pharmacies would be one, or manufacturing, some sort of manufacturing, etc. So you have 200 different supply chains in an urban area. This is enormous. This may be more difficult to put together than passenger transport statistics, for example, because each of these urban logistic chains is very specific. Different specific vehicles, sizes of vehicles are very different in freight, much more than for passenger transport, obviously. Specific operators, small operators, large companies, subcontracting between both, own account transport versus for-hire transport. You can do your own freight transport, or you can hire a transport company to do it. Extremely different time windows for each sector, different ways of consolidating the deliveries, etc. So you have to think about 200 different chains. So this makes it more difficult to survey, expensive to survey, and more difficult to model. But progress has been made, and this ratio is one of the examples that we can come up to simple statistics about urban freight. So a huge efficiency of urban freight in a way, because we get the goods. But this comes at a cost, and the cost is primarily environmental. The cost is air pollution and CO2 emissions. Vans and trucks are a major cause for poor air quality in European cities. So simple to say, but it's not really translated into measures and actions. When you see an air quality plan in Europe of a city, freight does get a small margin of the measures and the policies behind it. Passenger gets the bulk of it. Although the problem is related to freight, at least at 30% of half of the problem, related to trucks and vans. Why? Because they are all diesel, especially in France, or where even passenger cars are, most of them are diesel. So all the vans are diesel there. They are old. That's a very important information. In Europe, what's circulating in cities in terms of commercial vehicles is the old trucks, old vans. They finish their life there. And that makes a very big difference in terms of they're just a small number of the vehicles circulating, but they are a huge share of the emissions because of their age. And of course, because of their activity, you get more emission because they constantly accelerate and stop, right? That's the deliveries activities. So you could remember a very basic way of looking at their responsibility, freight is responsible for a quarter of transport-related CO2 emissions in cities, a third of NOx, and half of the PM, particulate matters. So a quarter, a third, half. This is not very precise, but it's grossly true for most of the big European cities that have been surveyed. I had the more specific example of one city in the south of France, Marseille, but I'll go quicker on it. But it's about the same, a quarter, a third, half. So much more than the simple number of vehicles in the total road traffic in a city, which would be 10, 15%. Quarter, third, half. Enormous responsibility. Paris, as many other European cities, does not meet the European Union requirements for air quality. As you have, we have standards. And we have to meet limit values for many pollutants. For the pollutants that are mostly related to freight transportation, NOx, NO2, and particulate matters, the city of Paris, the area of Paris does not meet standards. They meet it only for one category out of 6. So a very important issue. And that's related to freight, although it's not, doesn't show so much in the policy documents and the policies that are implemented. Another problem with urban freight, and that's also part of the what makes it so efficient. And I think it's quite different for the US cities, but it's very prevalent in big European cities, especially Southern Europe, including France. The labor market and the working conditions. So, to be an urban operator, to make deliveries, it's quite easy. You need a van, and you need to register to a transport register, which is very easy to get in. You need to prove you have a few thousand euros, and you need to prove you have no criminal record, and that's about it. And you need a 3-day training. Very easy. So you have a lot of entrants, new companies getting into this market all the time, and many companies getting out because of bankruptcies. But this market is a highly competitive market. A lot of small independent truck companies, owner-drivers, using these kind of trucks. You see that really a lot in the most urban areas of Paris, delivering goods. Who are they? They're subcontractors of the big companies. Even UPS, who doesn't subcontract too much, has 50% of their delivery routes in Paris is subcontracted. They won't allow that because they look at their subcontractors. But many other companies will allow that. The medium-sized big trucking companies. They will not go into Paris. It's too expensive, too complicated. They will use these little, small companies. And there's a very interesting figure, the 12,000. And it's not out of a scientific database or a survey or an official survey. Actually, I don't know where it comes from. But what's interesting is that it's a number that's being discussed in the industry as a way to show, and it shows their concern about the state of the industry, the dysfunctioning market of the urban freight operations. Because they say that's the freight industry, the freight organizations giving this number. 12,000 small freight transport companies operate in Paris and the surrounding areas. Half of them are not registered. So I told you it was easy to get a license. They don't even do that. So they're totally out of the legal operations. And of course, this keeps transport prices very low. That makes actually deliveries so efficient because you always find people to do the delivery at that particular time in that particular neighborhood because you will find someone to do it. That makes a big difference in terms of prices, and everybody is happy about that. But that makes a big difference also in terms of the way these operations are made. Old trucks, not much consolidation. You could do the same kind of service with less truck miles or van miles, but because you have all these small companies, you do get a lot of non-consolidated trips. So remember efficiency and environmental cost, and social cost too, because this working population is quite, there's low salaries, too many hours of work, accidents, etc. So now going back to my stories about CO2, I will show you 3 different assessments made at 3 very different scales and for different markets. But what's interesting is that we can go, for all of them, we can go to a CO2 emissions indicator. So I will show you some experiments in last mile deliveries in the center of the city of Paris. I will show you the research I've been doing on logistics sprawls and taking the example of one sector of the distribution activities, which is the parcel and express transport services. And I will show you some results of the carbon footprint of Paris and the share of freight in this general carbon footprint. So 3 very different things, but we will compare the results in terms of CO2. So this is the region I'm going to talk about. This is the region of Paris. It's called Île-de-France. It's one of the 20 regions of France. It's an institution. The region is an institution that has some planning and economic development competence and other specific things. It's not a very important region. It doesn't have anything to do with the states here, for example. But it's still an institution with some powers. So it's 12 million people. In the very core of this Paris region, you have the city of Paris. City of Paris is only 2 million people. It's actually a lot of jobs because it's 1.5 million jobs, which is a higher percentage than the rest of the region. So you see the concentration of jobs still in the city of Paris. I will go back to that. It's important for the logistics sprawl story. And you also see the urban area of the region. This is where most of the jobs are, and 8 million people are. So I'm going to talk about the city of Paris and things happening in the city of Paris. And I'm going to talk about the metro area, mostly. So my first story is last mile, sophisticated, innovative delivery experiments. They received a huge amount of media attention. This is just a sample of the specialized newspapers and general newspapers too. Le Parisien, Le Monde, all the general press, but also specialized press, just for the past year. And all these titles are about urban distribution, the new economy, projects multiplying, bicycle deliveries, subway, using subway to do urban logistics, etc. This is something that regularly comes in the newspaper, on TV, local TV. It's about all these innovative, experimental ways of delivering urban centers. The city of Paris supports that, gives financial help, and it's quite huge amounts of budgets for that. I will give you some figures. And actually, it's part of the mayor's strategy for freight. It's a key part. It's the most important part of the freight strategy of the city of Paris. So I'm going to give you the example, to detail two of them, this one and this one, Monoprix and Chrono. Monoprix is the big retailer. It's exactly the equivalent of Target. So it's the French Target. So they have lots of stores, and they have 90 stores in the region. And Chrono is a major parcel transport company in France. They have about 20% of the market. But you also have a few other ones that are all very original, very innovative, but all of them are rather small in terms of the volume of freight they actually deliver. So the Monoprix freight train, it's been operating since 2007, 90 stores in Paris and in the surrounding cities are supplied by this new scheme, and it's about half of the total volume of freight that is sold in the stores. So half of the goods in Monoprix stores are distributed through a train and CNG trucks. CNG trucks, natural gas trucks. So very environmentally friendly new way of supplying stores. The city of Paris, this is an urban terminal that's used for the scheme. This terminal, when I say urban, it's very urban. It's right in the center of Paris. Notre Dame would be here. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a Google map with both, but Notre Dame would be here. So you're less than a mile from Notre Dame. You're very close to the river, and you're very close to the urban fabric, the dense urban fabric. So that's where the new logistics terminal is, to supply 90 stores of Monoprix. This is the terminal. The city has paid for the renovation, and Monoprix has paid also for the interior, the reorganization of interior. And these are the big CNG trucks that are used. They use 30 trucks every day, every morning. So what's the supply chain? Everything arrives in the suburban terminal, but everything arrives by trucks from the rest of the country, the rest of Europe, from Le Havre or Antwerp, other big ports, big European gateways. Everything comes by trucks, very heavy-duty vehicles. Everything gets downloaded in the terminal, and the train is formed of about 20 cars every night that goes to the center of Paris, to the center of the area, to Paris, to the terminal I showed you. This is about 30 kilometers by train, and then it's CNG trucks. But think about the rest. The rest is trucks. There's no rail. They used to have a lot of rail, but freight rail in France has basically disappeared for the past 15 years. But they recreated this one, okay? So the results of the experiment. All the results I'm going to show you for these experiments come from consulting agencies that use the same methodology from the French Agency for the Environment. And I was part, or colleagues were part of the steering committees of these studies, so we have the data, which also are public in a way, but they are difficult to find, but you can use them. So it's a study made in 2009. And giving just a few information about what the city paid. The city of Paris paid 11 million euros for the renovation of the terminal. And Monoprix paid some. But what we're interested here in today is the saving of emissions of CO2. They calculated that it was about 400 tons of CO2 every year, saved because of the new organization. Another interesting figure, it's not my topic today, but I think it's interesting to point out, is an increase in transportation costs, 20% increase per pallet, which is an enormous increase for transportation activity.
So prior to that, everything was coming in by
all lorries, all trucks.
it was all trucks going
Yes.
into Paris. And
Yes.
okay.
While medium-sized trucks would go out of the suburban terminal and deliver. So remember, 400 tons. The second experiment is the Chrono electric deliveries. So Chrono again, is a parcel transport company. It's a subsidiary of the group La Poste, a major carrier. Again, an innovation in the way deliveries are made, because they recreated an urban terminal. It's a little bit like Monoprix, but it's not including trains, of course. It's including electric vehicles. So how does it work? This is the old way of delivering, a suburban terminal, and a dozen medium-sized trucks delivering the west of Paris. Today, the same suburban terminal, just one trip to another terminal, which is urban. It's actually very, very, very urban. This is Place de la Concorde, one of the most expensive real estate in the world, probably. So they go in this urban terminal, and then only electric vans and other kinds of equipment that are totally environmentally friendly do the deliveries. This is what they're using, electric vans, another brand of these electric little vans. And they designed that, they call that Chrono City. They actually designed them themselves. They had a factory do them. Now they're selling them to other carriers. So it's basically a little container put on a chassis, and it has to be hauled by hand, but there's an electric power assistance. So it's not as hard as it looks. So there's a daily shuttle between the suburban hub and the underground facility, because of course the urban terminal is not on Place de la Concorde on the surface. It's in a municipal car park. That's actually a smart way of arranging, accommodating a logistic space in the city. You think of what's underground, and what's underground? Car parks. A lot of municipal car parks in the city of Paris are underground. So the city decided to give them, at a very low cost, very low price of rental, a terminal. So the results, again, another consultant. Higher productivity, 70 addresses per route instead of 56 addresses before the organization. Of course, additional costs, because there's a new terminal. You need to transship again. You need to load to another kind of vehicle. So another operation to do in the chain. But the consultants say that it's compensated by the savings made on fuel, because they're using only electric vehicles. The company invested some money into the terminal, and the city is actually losing revenue because it's not having the revenue from the car parking. It's just having some rental price from Chrono, but it's not the real rental price you would get, of course, in this very expensive area. So the results that are most interesting us today, the CO2 emissions. Before the scheme, to deliver this neighborhood, you would emit about 30 tons of CO2. Today, you emit about 11 tons of CO2. That's for 6 months. So for a year, that would be 34 tons of CO2 saved thanks to the new scheme. 2/3 of the saving come from the use of electric vehicle. Electricity in France comes from nuclear energy, so the whole cycle is quite non-emitting in terms of CO2. 1/3 comes from the consolidation of the routes. They actually have less truck miles because of the scheme. But remember, 33 tons. And local emissions, but I'm going to go faster on that. Very good environmental results in terms of local emissions too. I had another example, just to show you the pictures, but I won't have time to detail the scheme. This is a small company that invented these tricycles, this new kind of bike with a big container. Actually, it's quite big. It's comparable to a van. So they compete with vans. They don't compete with messenger bikes. Or they have quite a lot of goods in these. And they became the favorite subcontractors of some big companies, TNT, Sanofi, the pharmacy distributor, Office Depot in London. They became the favorite subcontractor for the very urban neighborhoods, especially the neighborhoods that have a lot of offices and retail and tourism in the historic parts of cities. So another interesting scheme. Okay, all these schemes together, heavily supported by the city of Paris, ended up with about 700 tons of CO2 saved per year. That's my result number one. Remember the scale of the emissions saved. And now a very different piece of research. That's the one I've been working on. That's the CO2 impact of what I call logistics sprawl. And as Jen said, it's actually looking at the way warehouses and all the logistics facilities displace themselves in an urban area over time. Spatial deconcentration of logistics facilities in metropolitan areas caused by urban developments, by cities' land use regulations, and of course it's caused by land costs in urban areas, and from the logisticians the need for much bigger, much larger distribution centers and warehouses and distribution facilities with modern architecture for their current activities. So we took the example of just one sector. This is the parcel and express transport activities. We took 2 years. We could get the data from 1974 until today. And these data are the exact location of all the terminals. And with a few examples, we could get also the data of, even in the past, what was going out of the terminals. This huge work has been done by Dina Rakotonarivo, who's a PhD student that I tutor. She's done an enormous amount of collecting this historical data. She went to the archives, and she found quite a comprehensive data set for the location of this particular sector, which is actually quite easy to track in the past, because the companies have remained the same. They've merged, they changed names, but they're not so difficult to find. So we identified and mapped the location of all the terminals in both years. We used a centrographic analysis, which is an analysis it's a geographic analysis of data in order to find a sprawl indicator. It's one of the users of this type of analysis. It's a very both simple and efficient way of looking at the way a phenomenon has sprawled. We identify the terminal's barycenter, the center of gravity of all the terminals. And we identify the average distance to their barycenter of the terminals for both years. So what's the indicator of sprawl? It's the difference in the average distance today and 30 years ago. So, but it will be more easy to understand with the maps. So this is the city of Paris. And in 1974, all the terminals were very close to the city of Paris. And actually, except for maybe, no, this is the airport. So you didn't even have one here. All of them are within the very urban core. In 2010, you have a very different picture. You have one in Paris, but this is the Chrono post in the Concorde that I showed you before. This is the only new one. And for the most part, most terminals have located at the fringes of the urban core, and some of them quite far in nearly rural areas. But what's interesting is the result, the indicator. The average distance of cross-dock terminals to their bari centers increased from 6 to 16 kilometers. 10 kilometers more today than before. It's an enormous change, even though we're taking 34 years, which is a lot. It's still an enormous change. You could say, of course, they had to follow the businesses, the customers, because the businesses also have gone out of Paris. Well, actually, the businesses, as I showed you before, the concentration of jobs and companies and economic activities has remained very high in the city of Paris. So the logistics terminals have gone very far away, but the economy they serve, all the businesses of the households, the home delivery, etc., have remained more concentrated. And we also looked at another, the same indicator for jobs. So jobs have sprawled 2 kilometers in the same time as logistics activities sprawled 10 kilometers in the same period. So it takes more truck miles to reach urban destinations to and from terminals today than before. So we try to calculate the net CO2 impact of these additional truck miles. We used, actually, as I told you, we could get some historic data on the number of trucks and their routes in the 70s for a few companies that gave us their archives. And then we extrapolated these examples to the other companies. You need 20 companies to represent 90% of the parcel market. So it's not such a hard thing to do. So we came up with this. We calculated an addition of 16,000 tons of CO2 needed today to serve the businesses in Paris compared with 1974. So that's my result number 2. Sprawling patterns of the parcel transport industry's warehouses generate additional emissions of 16,000 tons of CO2. And now my last story about these CO2 emissions. And I will be much quicker on that because it's just one work that has been done for the city of Paris, and I have very few information about it. But it's advertised by the city of Paris. So it's, again, a sort of official result, an official part of the policy of the city of Paris. That's their carbon footprint. In 2005, they asked a consultant using the Agency for the Environment's methodology to look for their carbon footprint, the city of Paris. And not the city as an institution, but the city as a city with all their activities, with their people, businesses, administrations, schools, everything that's happening in Paris. How much do we generate? I live in Paris, so I was part of the story. And I think it's quite interesting. I did look at the report. I did look at it because I was surprised by the huge amount that was allocated to freight. Because freight transportation, you can see on the graph, is one of the 3 main contributors of CO2 emissions in this 2005 work on the carbon footprint of the city of Paris. So industry, of course, the city of Paris has very little industry. But buildings, 1.75 million tons or the total is 6.55. That's the carbon footprint for 1 year. So buildings, construction, heating, etc. Passenger transport, same, enormous. But freight transport, same, enormous. So that's also what I was telling you before. CO2 related to freight is more in our calculation, in what the Lyon Economic Laboratory did, is more like 25%, 30%. In this study, they found exactly same amount as passenger transport, half. And I was surprised, so I also communicated with them. They actually took into account everything a Parisian consumes, even if it comes from, and they will take the whole travel of the good. So if it comes, of course, from Asia, they will take this into account. Everything that's air cargo is taken into account. And air cargo in this is actually half of their calculation. It's, of course, and the City of London at the same time was doing the same work. They didn't take this into account at all. They didn't take the same methodology. They took only what's circulating in the City of London. And they ended up with a much lower carbon footprint. So it's all a question, of course, of what you do and what your choices are of methodology. But what I think interesting in this, and I don't know much about the methods and the relevancy of what they did, but is that the city is advertising this. This is on the website, and this is in the policy making. That's an important diagnostic for them. They use that. So that's the official situation. 6.5, and within that, a lot from freight transportation. So my result number 3, total freight distribution activities in Paris generate emissions of 1.75 million tons of CO2 per year. So now, and I'm going to my conclusion. Remember all the different figures I gave you about CO2. You had a 40 million ton of CO2 that was freight for France, Agency of the Environment. 1.75 million tons, that's freight for the city of Paris. 16,000 tons, that's just what the logistics sprawl of parcel cross-dock terminals generated. And 700 is what the policy, the very active policy of supporting city logistics experiments saved in terms of CO2. So I think that it's interesting to look at these 3, 4 figures, because it gives you a sense of the broad image that I think policymakers don't want to look at. While contributing to some reduction of emissions through very smart and very interesting last-mile delivery initiatives, the city of Paris at the same time was ignoring a huge increase in truck miles because of invisible patterns of relocation of freight facilities. And urban freight policymakers, I think, should be aware of the general trends. So these are the 40 million CO2, the 1.75 million CO2. These are actually enormous compared to even what I calculated in terms of logistics sprawl. So they should know of these general trends. And maybe because they could engage in more comprehensive, but not so interesting in terms of image, policies over small-scale media-exposed projects. And in these comprehensive policies, and that's what I'm working on in, my general work is about these local policies. I include, of course, planning, land use. Don't get rid of all the logistics facilities in your urban territory. Try to keep some of them. I include also And it's very important. It's not so important in terms of CO2, but in terms of emissions of local pollutants, particulate matters. I include the regulations related to the age of the trucks, trying to get rid of the very old vans and trucks that are circulating in cities such as Paris or Milan or Madrid. These very old vans that can be 20 years old. Try to get rid of these. Not go all the way to electric trucks. This is fantastic, electric vans and trucks, but 99% of the companies will not buy them. But try to act on the 99% of the companies, and this means try to regulate the very, very old trucks. For example, just try to prohibit access to trucks that are older than 10 years. These are very simple measures, but they can have a huge impact on the emissions and on the way the market is organized, because many of these small operators will have to modernize themselves in order to be able to deliver Paris. So these are the discrepancies in policies and policymaker attention that I'm interested in at the moment. Thank you.
In, I think, 2008, the IEA changed their calculations for the global oil supply. They came up with a peak oil date of 2025 or sooner, sort of buried in their report, so it wasn't readily apparent. So has France considered a policy of more rapidly, say, changing over to either all electric or natural gas-powered vehicles?
They do have programs. They do have programs. And the electricity of France, which relies on nuclear energy, of course, is very much into these programs and lobbying for these changes of trucks. And Renault, which is the government, the French government is part of, has a 20% share of the Renault manufacturing company. He's quite advanced in electric cars, but still, the technology is not yet ready for 99% of truck companies, as I said.
Well, but is there any kind of statistics on the length of the trip? Because most of these trips I would expect to be
yes, that's not the problem. Yeah, that's not the problem.
Okay.
Electric delivery vehicles are very convenient. The only problem is their cost. You have to buy something that's twice as expensive. And the government provides some overcost subsidies, but they can't subsidize everybody. And it's also very difficult to resell, because the trucking industry needs a reselling market, second-hand, third-hand trucks. Reselling an electric vehicle for the moment, nobody knows how to do that. They don't know how to do that. They don't know how to put that into their accounting. It's just something that doesn't exist.
I was just wondering, the two companies you mentioned, Monoprix and Chrono, was their motivation for having these new systems, was it an economic motivation, or do you think that that had environmental motivation?
Monoprix is not an economic motivation, because they lose money over the rail scheme. But they told me they gained so much money in terms of publicity that it was worth it. And actually, I don't know about Target, but Monoprix has grown up has upscaled its image, and now it's considered the most environmentally friendly retailer. And so it goes very well with their target area, which is urban populations in big cities. So I think they saved actually money on the whole image building, but not on transportation. They lost 20% increase in cost per pallet. It's really big. But they have their own company, so they can impose that on them. And Chrono is about the same. They want to show progress in environmental.
You had a slide earlier, the three zones, the city of Paris, the inner core, and the outer. Has there been a major population change from 1970 of these three different areas?
Yeah, of course, very good question. Yes, yes. I guess double. But, and the population has sprawled. What has not sprawled is the jobs.
Yes. So the population is doubled from 1970, right?
I don't want to say something silly. I know it's been a huge increase since World War II. I don't know exactly from the 70s, so I could look at
that growth been inside the urban core has been on the outer regions though?
No, the urban core has remained, that was 2.5 million after the war. That's 2 million today. They even came down to 1.8 and then we regained, such as here, the urban center regained population. But it remained about the same. What has increased a lot, of course, is this, and the rural. It's not so rural anymore, actually. It's a lot of residential sprawl here. There's a huge train system, and it's millions of trips every day from the very far areas to the center or to these. These are very heavy in jobs, too, all these areas. But the jobs, that was interesting, and before we did this little calculation, I was not expecting that. The jobs have remained centralized, much more than residents, population, and my logistics.
From 9 to 12 million, according to something I found here.
Okay, from 9 to 12, so sorry, it's not half. But
That's the urban region.
okay, from the 70s to
yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
75.
Thank you.
So you mentioned about the particulate matter. I'm interested in that. Are you aware of any studies that looked at actual reduction of particulate matter because of these last mile initiatives or electrification?
Oh yes, they all have that in the studies, and it's impressive. Of course, when you turn to an electric fleet, you gain a lot of, especially in Paris where everything is diesel. So you suddenly lose the particulate matter emissions. But on the whole, Paris has stabilized, the region has stabilized its concentration of PM10 and PM2.5 over the last, we can't make it down. We can't reduce them. It's not working because of the increase of traffic, of course, of road traffic and freight. But these experiments have been totally successful.
Are commercial vehicles subject to the same high fuel taxes in France as personal vehicles?
The long haul has a reduction. That's so incredible. Yes. So they receive such subsidy. It doesn't apply to the small, the regional operations.
Because it seems to me like, you know, when you talk about the U.S., it's like, well, people substitute high capital costs of warehouses in the city to go out to the suburbs, and the reason why is because they're not paying the full cost of their fuel. But so it's the same story.
No, it's rather expensive, but you know, it's also an equilibrium. We reached another equilibrium, but that's part of their expenses, and it doesn't change much the amount of. We're very road-oriented in freight, for example, in France. There's absolutely no rail.
Well, it just seems to me that, I mean, I guess it's the same story in the U.S., so that if they were really paying their full external costs of using trucks, then things like, you know, the relative cost of that rail train might even be cheaper.
Actually, you know, the tolling in France is really high, but it's all rural. All the highways are heavily tolled, and especially for trucks. They pay much more than we do. But what is interesting and not really relevant, I think, is that once you reach an urban area, you don't pay tolls anymore. Nobody pays to use the regional highways and the urban ways, of course. So they do pay their external costs, but on where there's no real problems of congestion, and they don't pay it for the rural, the urban areas.
You should a huge reduction through electric cars. I want to know, do you have any information about the battery for these cars, and then if you have a mass production of this electric car, what is going to be environmental result of these batteries that we have to reuse it, or any information?
I don't have that expertise at all, but I have the information somewhere, yes. I know it's not yet ready for the trucking industry. And in terms of the, you mean the environmental?
Yeah, because it's going to be
Assessment
another
of the whole-
obstacle for environmental issues, that we're going to have too many
What to do with the
batteries that
batteries,
we
yes.
don't know what we want to do with it.
right. I heard that, but I couldn't tell you much more about it. I'm sure there's studies from this agency for the environment. They have done a lot. Because electric, as I said, the electricity lobby in France is very high because of the nuclear plants we have. So we sell electricity, and we want other markets.
There was a table about the CO2 emission through different sectors. What I have always seen is that we have industry and transportation and building. Mostly the United States building have the main problem with more than 40% of the greenhouse emission.
The buildings?
Yes.
In the US?
In the US.
Well, it's high. But you know, you have to be careful. You have to know what they have behind it. I didn't look at that because that was not my...
I was wondering that when you talk about the building and you have the freight otherwise, so the freight and transportation could be one as transportation, because for the building, you know, you have all activity related to building and industry. So it seems that the transportation has been divided to two parts here.
Because you don't have the freight. Yeah, I'm sure the freight terminals are in the. I can answer that, because all the buildings include the freight terminals. What's in here? They showed me how they did it. So they took the tonnage of goods received per in Paris. It's about 32 tons per inhabitant, something like that. They looked at the modal split, including air, maritime, etc. And they gave an average distance for each kind of trip, regional, national, international, 1,000 kilometers. And they applied the ratios of CO2 emissions. It's quite basic, actually, but they didn't include the buildings. Not the way distribution centers generate. That's in the buildings. But that's an interesting point, yes. It would be another way of looking at freight emissions.
I have another question. You had a map of the terminals and yeah. My question is that, you know, in 1974, you look at the Paris. I don't know if, my question is that if there is any urban area around the Paris at the time that you didn't count those terminals, because right now the Paris has brought, since that those urban areas have added, but they were there anyway. Some of them at least were in 1974 there, even though they may not be in terminal for Paris, that for the other urban area around the Paris, which now has been added to the Paris.
74 was, as you said, 9 million people, and it was already quite a unique metropolitan area, not different cities that merged. That's not what happened. It was already a large urban area that was all connected. It's, for a personal transport company, they will organize by big sectors, geographic sectors. But they still consider this whole 8 million area as a unique area, and then they look at sectors. But there was not one city and Paris and another city. They were all already in the 70s. Yeah. It was a continuum of urban.
You said that in 1974, the border of the metropolitan is the same, even though some of parts of it is not populated, is the same?
It has changed because the residential sprawl has been important. It has changed, but it was already a big continuum of an urban area. And these terminals were really in the cities and generating big problems too, actually, of course. These were, some of them were rail. These are rail operations. Some of them had already turned to trucks, but they kept their location in train stations. And most of them were big trucks and coming in and trucks getting out. But many of them were serving the urban area, which is what they do today. But today they're over there. They're not serving, this one is not serving these people because there's no businesses. There's people, but there's no company.
I've heard a lot of people say that like the reason high-speed rail wouldn't work in the US is because we rely so much on freight rail while they don't in Paris. Did TGV have anything to do with the fact that you don't have that much freight rail?
Not technically, because the slots can be arranged, and TGV has their own tracks. They could interfere with the freight trains in the urban areas where TGV actually takes regular tracks. But in most cases, it's not a technical problem. But TGV got all the budgets and the attention. And that they also say freight lost because it's the same company. And they were very good for TGV, but they put all their efforts on that, and they forgot about the rest. And the regional trains were taken over by the regions. They were very good at putting a lot of budget, and, but it's subsidized. It's 74% subsidies for the operations, not even the investments. Investments are 100% public, and operations today of the regional trains, 75% public. So the freight, of course, is not subsidized, and they suffered from the lack of attention, but the main responsibility for me is the company. The SNCF just forgot about them. It's not a technical problem.
Is there one last question? Deepak?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, it's fine. I can ask after.
Well, one of the arguments that you make is that the decentralization of the terminals has kind of resulted in the increase of emissions, right?
Yes.
And my question is it that kind of the natural evolution of the market, given that A, you got increase in residential population in the suburban areas. So jobs are concentrated in downtown, but residents are still in the suburban areas, more have increased, and so deliveries have to be made there. And the other component is the real estate price. I imagine over those 30 years, you got more of an percentage increase in the core than in suburbia. And so logistics centers would have moved outside, priced out because of higher and better uses in the center, right?
I totally agree with you. The main factor was the land prices.
Land prices, right? So
and you know, in Tokyo, for example, I visited Tokyo, and it was interesting to see that they have big logistics facilities right in the center. And they have multi-story facilities managed by Prologis, the American real estate developer of logistics facilities. 10-story buildings in the center. And they told me, of course, the price of the land in suburban Tokyo is actually quite high. So there's no much point in moving. So it's one of the factors.
So kind of if I look at the bigger picture, so it looks like, I mean, the way you said it, deliveries are very efficient, right? Right now it is just working very well. The market is taking care of it. The only thing is, well, only the big thing is the cost, environmental cost. Yes. And that also at the margin.
And congestion too. And congestion too. And I only talk about emissions, but this does add, VMTs in the
But
region.
it seems like at the margins, companies are making these changes and kind of getting their market, kind of customer. So saying what you talk about, the Chronoprix or whatever.
Monoprix.
Oh yeah, Monoprix. Monoprix. That they are kind of targeting their customer by saying we are environmentally friendly. So seems like on the whole things are working out well. I mean, if I'm reading.
That's why I'm saying it's highly efficient. It's just that there's a big problem of emissions. I really think so. It's becoming half of the problem, and this is becoming a problem that policymakers don't look at all, which is surprising. They do a lot about bicycle schemes for electric cars. There's a new operations in Paris that you can use actual electric cars, such as you do for bicycle. They do a lot of efforts on public transportation. As I told you, 75% of operations is paid by the region. They don't do anything, they don't do even simple measures against very old trucks. The truck I showed you, the photo, it should not happen. I really think it's maybe 10% of the fleet, but it's half of the emissions of trucks. It's not sustainable. And it's simple.
It's efficient, but it's not efficient.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you can't call that an efficient market in a socially beneficial way or social welfare point of view. It's a very inefficient market because there are all kinds of inequalities and externalities that are being imposed on others.
Yeah, there's negative externalities accruing from a very efficient market, delivery market.
But that's for another conversation. Let's thank